Hello everybody and a warm welcome from my side. I'm Jenny Bischoff. I'm from the International Environmental Justice Network in JUST, and today I'm going to give you a short introduction into environmental justice. So I'm working for InJust, and InJust is mostly existing out of scientists, but also practitioners who are aiming at creating a platform for vivid discussion around the topics of environmental justice and making this open to the public. So today the content is going to be, first I'm going to explain you a little bit about the origin and history of the environmental justice movements, what is environmental justice, and the three dimensions of environmental justice, and the last point is going to be a little specification on urban planning and EJ. So first of all, the origin and history behind everything. So in 1982, activists from Barron Country, North Carolina, sparked a powerful social movement when over like 400 demonstrators were arrested for protesting the siting of a toxic waste facility in the predominantly Black and low-income community. They first framed their struggle as one against environmental racism, noting that majority Black neighborhoods were disproportionately exposed to high levels of environmental pollution. And since 1992, where the UN Conference on Environment and Development took place in Rio de Janeiro, the concept of environmental justice has been discussed on a transnational level. So on the right side, you can see Robert D. Bullard. He is seen as the father of environmental justice, and he's also a pioneer in the research area of environmental justice. So it shifted the discussions from not in my backyard, which probably everybody kind of knows, to where we live, work, and play. So it kind of shifted the perspectives on also how we're approaching nature as such. And the diversity of topics expanded not only from like toxic waste, for example, but also to pesticides, to supply chains and everything else. For example, climate justice, you also probably heard about that. And it's also important to note that it's not only about environmental impacts, but also about environmental resources. So it's, for example, noise pollution is something bad, kind of, but also park relaxation is something good. So you have this balance, kind of. And also, what is important to note is that a lot of residents, for example, in neighborhoods which got affected by, for example, toxic waste, they were gathering together without big knowledge or something, but creating movements and against environmental injustices. So it kind of grew from a grassroots level. It not came from top down, but more from bottom up. And here I have like kind of the differences between traditional environmental movements and environmental justice movements. For example, WWF is like a traditional environmental movement who's kind of still seeing nature as like a separate entity that must be protected from external influences, which is kind of a post-colonial definition in itself. And environmental justice movements, as I just said, are kind of grassroots levels who have this holistic approach of nature as well, and also the conflicts around everything, seeing nature as the place where we live, work, and play. So it's not something like differentiated from us, which we have to protect, but it's actually part of our living. And so there's also a lot of, for example, local communities participating in these movements who are living in areas which need to be protected or declared as conservation areas, where it's important to, for example, outsource people, if you can say that. So yeah, what is environmental justice? There are a lot of different definitions of what is justice as such. We have here, for example, on the second picture, you can see it in a good way, that people kind of start on different levels, and not one person is shorter than the other. So this, for example, is like the structural differences we have, such as consequences of colonialism or economic systems. So people are just starting on different levels, and how can we balance that? So what of these pictures shows justice? Well, the answer depends on whom you ask. But in environmental justice, often the structural change is seen as a necessity for justice. Which leads us also to this slide to show you like what is environmental justice. So environmental justice is not only one thing. It's, for example, a protest movement, but it's also an academic research field. Often environmental movements are using it as a slogan, but it's also a normative principle or a tool in political debates. So it's really a broad term. And here you can also see it's like a kind of overview of what kind of justices and injustices environmental justice integrates. So, for example, climate justice, you probably heard of, energy justice, indigenous justice, health justice. So there's a lot of topics which are merging into one thing. And yes, it's just seen as a really good analytical tool, kind of also to grasp all this holistic of environmental conflicts. And here I have one definition for you, also saying it beforehand, there's a lot of definitions, and it's also seen as a necessity to have a lot of definitions in this field, because it's just so broad and so holistic. So it's needed to have different definitions to look from different perspectives on everything. So this one is from Friends of the Earth, which says environmental justice means that every person has a right to healthy places to live, work, and enjoy themselves, a right to a fair share of benefits, of nature's benefits, like food and water, and a responsibility to look after the planet for others and for future generations. But this one, for example, excludes the fair distribution also of environmental burdens, of procedural aspects. So yeah, it can be seen, as I just said, as a simple systematic analytical tool to grab environmental conflicts, even in their complexity and holistic. So there's kind of three dimensions of environmental justice which are used to grasp these conflicts, which is distributive justice, procedural justice, and justice of recognition. And distributional justice, like they're all kind of very closely related to each other. But as the term implies, for example, distributive justice is about distribution, the distribution of benefits, for example, environmental resources such as water, but also of disadvantages, for example, risks such as who lives in areas where floods are most likely to occur, who lives in regions where toxic waste is stored, etc. Procedural justice is including like the involvement in decision-making processes. Did local communities receive all necessary information they need about a project? Is there a possibility to object to a project if they want to implement it? So justice is judged by how decisions are made, who is involved, and who can exert influence. And this level especially is also closely related to justice of recognition. So recognition equity deals with the question of who is respected and recognized and who is not. So are people treated differently because of their membership of an ethnic group, religion, or gender? So it includes social, cultural, and political recognition of individuals and groups and processes. And environmental justice is not also seen as something where you see where the conflicts are, but you're also asking what are actually the causes. So, for example, causes could be like the functioning of the capitalistic system and the existing power structures. And EJ really tries to dive deep into the topics and sees like the whole holistic frame of it. So coming to urban planning and EJ, which is probably interesting for you. So there's, for example, an ongoing conflict about affordable housing versus climate protection. Because on the one hand, it is really, really needed to have, for example, more greening on rooftops, more solar panels, but also fresh air corridors or more green parts in the cities, for example, which needs a lot of space, which needs a lot of money. And then on the other hand, you have the need for affordable housing. You need development kind of also to create new houses for people and also for people with low income. So you have this conflict on what is possible on the one hand and there's like social justice aspects which also need to be taken into care. So you have kind of a lot of conflicts in here where it's not that simple to just say like this is the right side to go, but it needs this holistic reflection to think about all these different levels, which is really needed in these processes. And for example, also shoreline construction is also a good example. So there's, for example, the development of coastal areas, how they always call it, for kind of more rich people build houses directly at the shorelines, and this leads to the exclusion of the public, for example, to have access to common areas such as beaches, etc. So yeah, like you can see here, there's also a lot of conflicts, and it's just really needed, as I explained earlier, to see these different levels of conflict, see the causes, rethink what is happening, where are the causes of all these problems, where we can tackle this, and how can we lead to a more just tomorrow. Yes, so with that, I hope I could give you a quick and short introduction into environmental justice. I hope I grasped your attention and interest. And if you want to look further on, we have more literature on our webpage, which you can visit on the above link. And the below link is a really good resource if you want to check more EJ conflicts worldwide. So yeah, thank you for your interest in environmental justice, and hope to see you soon.